I firmly believe we are at a major turning point, not just for the United States, but perhaps for the entire world. And yes, that sounds dramatic. I don't usually speak in such sweeping terms, but sometimes reality insists that you do. I'm not going to shy away from it. Here's the truth. For the first time in a century, the United States faces a real economic competitor, big, powerful, highly developed, a country capable of outcompeting us at almost every level, from the simplest technologies to the most advanced. And yet, America is still coming to grips with this fact. I see it as a kind of collective denial. My wife, a psychotherapist, calls it precisely that, denial. Pretending mostly to yourself that the reality around you doesn't exist. Think of a toddler confronted with a barking dog. She hides her eyes, convinced that if she cannot see the dog, it is no longer there. That's how we're behaving with China. But the world doesn't work that way. China isn't going anywhere. China is growing, and they are building power at our expense. Next time you hear a politician boast about America's economic supremacy, or read an article claiming we are the strongest economy in the world, remember the word denial. It is the modern equivalent of a child covering her eyes. Not only has China outgrown us, but they've also created alliances with other nations that understand the game has changed. The rules that applied for the last 75 years, America as a global economic hegemon, the country that emerged from World War II relatively unscathed, no longer apply. Take the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That was the original five. A year and a half ago, 6 more countries joined. And just a few weeks ago, 13 more joined. Together, the BRICS nations represent more than half the world's population. The United States, 4.5%. That's not dominance. That's marginal. And it's not just population. The BRICS already produce more goods and services than the United States and its traditional allies, the G7, which includes Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. The world is reassessing. Every country, every company is recalibrating. Why? Because the dominant player for the last 70 years isn't dominant anymore. When a country builds a railroad or a port or an industrial hub, it no longer looks just to Washington, London, or Paris. Increasingly, the choice is made east, not west. This brings me to the largest reality we now face, the end of the American empire. What we inherited from the British, the last empire before ours, is over, and there is no coming back. Yet denial persists. This refusal to face economic realities, realities that shape our lives, and even more the lives of our children, is profoundly dangerous. Look at Ukraine as one example among many. When the war began in February 2022, President Biden and his administration assured us Russia would collapse, the ruble would fail, the West would unite behind Ukraine, and Moscow would be defeated. None of it happened. Every prediction was wrong. Why? Because the strategy relied on ignoring reality. The West assumed that if Russia was cut off from European energy markets, it would crumble. But Russia adapted. They went to their BRICS partners, primarily China and India, and sold the oil and gas that Europe no longer purchased. The result: Russia is growing faster than the United States and has grown faster throughout the war. Denying reality is costly. Every empire in history shows the same pattern. The climb up is exhilarating, the descent is brutal. The 20th century was our ride up. The 21st century is our ride down, and we don't yet know how to handle it. Denial is nothing new. Travel to Britain today, and you'll still find people nostalgic for the British Empire. Here in the United States, the wealthy and powerful are offloading the costs of a declining empire onto the rest of us. They protect their assets, shield themselves, and let the middle class, the working class, and the poor take the hit. Consider inflation. The rise in prices, eggs, gas, groceries, lowered the standard of living for millions. People felt it. Politically, it reshaped elections. It helped Mr. Trump and hurt others. But Inflation is just one symptom of a deeper decline. The empire is dying, and denial only makes the fall more painful. Let me give you some other examples that would make any economist stare in disbelief. The federal minimum wage in the United States is $7.25 an hour. Think about that. $7.25. That's a number on which no one can survive. And when was it last raised? 2009, 15 years ago. Meanwhile, inflation has marched steadily upward every year, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, but always upward. And what did we do for the people at the very bottom of the wage scale? Nothing. Republicans didn't raise it. Democrats didn't raise it. For 15 years, the poorest workers in America have been left behind. That's cruel. Not just unfair, but cruel. And it's exactly what a declining empire looks like. The rich and powerful protect themselves while the rest of us take the hit. Here's another sign. Real wages, the money people actually take home once you account for rising prices, have been stagnant for 3 or 4 decades. Adjusted for inflation, the average American worker's wage has barely budged, 0.5% a year. That's stagnation. Your pay isn't going anywhere. Meanwhile, the story in China is the exact opposite. Over the last 30 years, real wages there have quadrupled. That's why the Chinese government remains secure, why their citizens celebrate economic growth, and why their power is expanding. Compare that to the United States, where wages have gone nowhere. If you don't see that, then denial is alive and well. We are experiencing an extraordinary deepening of inequality in this country. After World War II, the United States was less unequal than most European nations. Today, we are more unequal than every European country. How did this happen? Corporations offshored jobs to China, taking advantage of cheap labor in a growing market. They made a fortune. The top 10% of Americans who own 80% of stocks and bonds did very well. The rest of us, we watch our wages stagnate and our cost of living rise, caught in the decline of an empire we no longer control. This inequality, coupled with inflation, helps explain Trump's political victories and the bitterness suffusing our politics today. And still, most Americans refuse to acknowledge it. Every country now understands that the United States has changed. We are no longer running the global show, keeping peace, dictating economic terms. We are now a nation of immense power, yes, but a nation in decline. Trump has been blunt about this. America is going to weaponize what remains, using it to extract wealth and influence from the rest of the world. We are no longer the dominant economic bloc. That belongs to China and the BRICS. Even nations that were historically adversaries are responding. China, Japan, South Korea, 3 countries with a long history of tension, are coordinating their actions. Their stated goal? To respond to Trump's America. Europe, fractured for decades, might even find a measure of unity as a result. A long shot? Yes, but it signals the reality. The United States is becoming isolated. Trump's erratic behavior with tariffs only reinforces that isolation. 1 week, tariffs go up, the next they come down. Adjustments, renegotiations, exceptions. It's impossible for corporations to plan. Factories cannot be relocated overnight. Supply chains cannot be rewired in a month. These aren't minor inconveniences. They take years and millions of dollars to implement. And every uncertain policy decision makes it harder for businesses to compete domestically or globally. That's the reality. The empire is in decline. The rich protect themselves. The working class bears the cost. And America, once unchallenged, now faces a world that no longer bows to its power. All of this comes at an enormous cost. No corporation is going to spend billions of dollars on a project only to discover it has to be abandoned because tariffs change on a whim. You can't make long-term business decisions like that. It creates hesitation, investment slows, decisions are delayed, and as anyone who has studied economics knows, in capitalism, we are all hostage to corporate planning. The working class earns wages, spends them, and that's the end of the story. The real power lies with the corporations deciding whether to invest their profits or park them in government bonds or worse, in non-productive ventures. That's how recessions, depressions, and delays occur. And nobody talks about it. Trump wants freedom. He wants deals to be made. But no one, not his advisors, many of whom hold PhDs from prestigious universities, explain to him the limits of this freedom. You cannot simply act as if America is still the overwhelming powerhouse it once was in the latter half of the 20th century. That empire is gone. This, my friends, is a desperate, largely blind gesture by a government that refuses to admit reality, pretending it can achieve what is simply no longer possible. Now, tariffs themselves are not new. The United States has used them throughout its history. Economists have studied them extensively. I've taught courses in international trade and international economics. I know what I'm talking about. And the literature is clear. The effect of a tariff depends entirely on the circumstances in all countries involved. You cannot predict the outcome in advance. Interest rates, exchange rates, monetary policy, retaliatory measures, they all matter. And if retaliation occurs, how will the U.S. respond? Yesterday, the Secretary of the Treasury stated he hoped no country would retaliate. He said it as if Trump's actions weren't already escalation. The level of absurdity is staggering. Trump cannot know the full consequences. Will there be inflation? Possibly. Will it be severe? Could be. Will it be mild? Could be. There is no certainty. The point is this is not liberation. This is desperation. The U.S. economy is now lashing out at the entire world. It's holding a gun to other nations, negotiating bilaterally, one by one, trying to squeeze concessions. We want this law repealed. We want this money. Maybe even Greenland, who knows? If the United States were still the superpower it once was, none of this would be necessary. Obama didn't need it. Bush didn't need it. Clinton didn't need it. Not because they were smarter or less committed to America's primacy, but because they didn't have to. The U.S. dominated global trade. We profited from free trade and could afford to distribute enough to keep domestic unrest minimal. Now, we can't. And what we are seeing instead is a tributary economy, a world forced to give the United States something it wants. TikTok, the Panama Canal, Greenland, minerals, deals imposed on Ukraine. This is no longer diplomacy. It is thievery disguised as policy. Desperation drives these actions, and the world knows it. And here's the kicker. Americans still struggle to grasp that other nations understand what's happening. The world sees us as hostile. Canadians are traveling less here. European governments are warning their citizens that the U.S. is unsafe. Tariffs on German exports like BMW and Mercedes. German workers lose jobs. And who do they blame? America. This is Trump's America. The consequences of this are predictable. Isolation, resentment, a world that no longer treats us as a partner, but as an adversary. And that ultimately is the danger of acting as if the empire still exists when it has already passed its peak. Now, let's be honest. Angry people around the world are going to stop buying American. Look at Tesla. The last 3 months have been a revelation. Nobody wants to touch it. Elon Musk is discovering, perhaps a bit too late, that there are real costs to prancing on stage with a chainsaw, celebrating that he's firing tens of thousands of workers. And guess what? The rest of the world has a way of responding. They might damage a Tesla, boycott American products, or simply find alternatives. American goods don't have a divine monopoly. Jeans, cars, electronics, the world will find substitutes, and the market will adjust. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Trump tells a story, a fanciful story about all the wonderful outcomes that will flow from his actions. What he doesn't tell you is the simple, unavoidable truth. Things could go wrong, badly wrong. And his claim that nothing will fail? Preposterous. He cannot afford honesty. He has to be a huckster, an advertiser. Think about what an advertiser does. They highlight the good, real, or imagined and hide the bad. it can only help you, it won't hurt you. Now imagine that mentality applied to the leader of a declining empire. That's what we're seeing. Consider the federal government's civilian labor force, 2.5 million people. Military personnel are separate. I'll set them aside. 2.5 million civilians. Now, add in state government, 5 million, and local government, 15 million. That's 20 million workers at the state and local level. Federal employees are just 1/10 of that. If your goal were efficiency, why attack the smallest, most efficient portion? It makes no sense. But the absurdity goes deeper. In the 1,960 seconds, the federal civilian workforce was 2.5 million. Today, 50 years later, our population has grown by 100 million, and we still have 2.5 million federal civilian employees. Economists would call that efficiency. 2.5 million managing 100 million more. That's precisely the last place you should target for cuts. But Trump doesn't care, or perhaps he doesn't understand. This is all theater, advertising, foolery. The numbers are real, but the narrative is fake. And no spokesperson will tell you the truth because it conflicts with the story of Trump versus fake news. Irony, isn't it? He's generating fake news faster than anyone he's ever criticized. Think of it this way: 3% of the population employers, the top of our economic pyramid, make the decisions. They decide whether to invest, they set prices, they determine wages. The rest of us, well, we are dependent on their choices. And that's the reality behind the gloss, the hype, the advertising. So here's the stark reality. We are controlled by the 3%, the employers, the top of our economic pyramid. That's how capitalism works. They have long understood how to protect themselves. And yet we have a political system that is fundamentally different. Universal suffrage. Everyone gets one vote. 97% of the population are not employers. Just 3% are. You might think that the majority, 97%, could easily mobilize to limit the wealth of the 3%. You would expect that to happen. But it doesn't. Why? Because the 3%, the ruling class, brought the government to their side. They did it through two political parties. Each party depends on the top 3% for funding, and then the parties divide. Half appeal to the right, rallying support around guns, nationalism, opposition to abortion. The other half appeal to the left, championing social welfare, minorities, women, and progressive policies. Both control the mass of voters, but the money flows to the top. Here's the punchline. The system tells the wealthy, we won't tax you. And it tells the masses, we'll give you something, a little here, a little there. But you can't buy the mass of people without taxing the wealth. So what's the workaround? You borrow. You go to the wealthy and say, since we didn't tax you, lend us the money, we'll pay you back with interest later. That's our deficit. That's why it exists. A deference to the rich at the expense of the majority. Take Elon Musk. The last I looked, his wealth was $350 billion or more. If the majority voted to tax half of it, he'd still be the richest man on earth. And the government, it would have $250 billion to solve social problems, reduce inequality, stabilize communities. Who benefits? Everyone, including Musk. A society less fractured, less angry, less conflicted. Yet, irrationality rules. And what do we see with Trump in the Rose Garden? An irrational response to an irrational problem. Unable to face reality, the solution becomes punishing the rest of the world. It's like cities such as New York or Philadelphia, desperate to solve local economic issues, refusing to tax the wealthy and instead taxing commuters. The logic is upside down. The strategy is flawed. The results? Predictable chaos. So let me ask you, how long can a society endure this level of denial before the consequences catch up? How long can we pretend that wealth concentration and declining global influence won't affect our daily lives? What happens when the rest of the world simply stops playing by our rules? We have to face these realities. We cannot hide behind slogans, fantasies, or theater. The empire is changing. The world has changed. And if we refuse to understand the forces reshaping our economy, our politics, and our very society, we will be left unprepared, and the consequences will be severe. Ask yourself, are we ready to confront the truth, or will we continue to let the 3% control the narrative while the rest of us pay the price? The time to think, to question, and to demand answers is now.